It's 10:10 now. We're going to try and move through this. We will have to take a break at 11 if, in fact, we don't get through this. If we're not done.
We need to get through this.
Yeah, just because we will have to take a break by then to reset the system.
We can minimize the speechifying.
From your mouth to God's ears. So I'd like to move to remove Council Bill 61 from the table.
Second.
Mr. Weinstein,
Yes.
Dr. Ball,
Yes.
Mr. Fox,
Yes.
Ms. Siggety,
I really want to vote no, but yes.
Ms. Tarassa.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to say it very slowly.
Council Bill 61, 2017, amending the Adequate Public Facilities Act.
She didn't read that very slowly. So,
I could read the whole title if you want.
no, I think we're good. I think we know which one this one is. Move to approve Council Bill 61.
Second.
Move to approve Amendment 1 to Council Bill 61.
Second.
Okay, we're going as slow as we can. It's, no, well, and Amendment 1 is yours, Mr. Fox.
No, it's the
Oh.
administration.
It's, oh, no, I'm sorry, in the move, sorry, a move to Amendment 1 to Amendment 1.
That's Mr.
That's
Fox.
Mr. Fox. So, yeah, we have.
We
also-
expended a lot of mental and emotional energy on the previous bills. We're shifting.
And just,
And incorporating
we'll
amendments
take
in our
a
book.
moment, a little out of sorts here, but whereas before we had amendments to amendments and those were all documented, we do not have that as clearly documented, so we are going to move a little slowly and make sure we don't miss anything. And so so when you see us pause to read, it's not for dramatic effect. And then also the numbering, just for a number of reasons, we're going to read the numbers based on sort of a logical progression, and so there are a couple that might be read out of numerical order, just because if one passes, then others do not need to pass. So, and so for those of you keeping score at home, this is the correct order with the exception of one. Probably not. There is one toward the end, Mr. Fox, which I will make sure to catch. Number 19 goes before 17 tonight, but,
So your Amendment 1 to Amendment 1.
right, so we have,
So Amendment 1 is, so is it?
Amendment 1 has been moved.
Yep.
But
and then-
not seconded.
But, Amendment 1 was not seconded, I'm sorry. Now I'd like, okay.
All right.
Then I'd like to move Amendment 1 to,
So are you
Amendment-
moving?
I'm moving it for you.
Yeah.
I'm trying to move everything right now.
I think that would probably be better unless there's a reason not to, just so we don't go.
Go ahead.
Out of order or whatever.
Very good.
Yep. Second.
All right, so Amendment 1, I don't know if it makes sense real quick for the administration to do Amendment 1, just to review it for everybody, and then I can do my Amendment 1 to Amendment 1.
I think that would probably make sense.
So Amendment 1 is to.
Good evening, Mr. DiLorenzo. It's nice to see you here this evening.
Yeah, who are
Good
you?
evening. I enjoyed the previous.
Just want to make sure people know that you're Carl DiLorenzo.
Oh, yes,
not
Carl
Jen
DiLorenzo.
Sager.
Thank you. Thank you. So the administration's Amendment 1 to CB61 clarifies the road mitigation projects that the developer is responsible to complete in the sequence of construction within its developer's agreement. The administration filed an amendment including both on-site and off-site requirements, but specifying that it's road improvements that are the responsibility of the developer to build.
Right, and so any questions on that before I hit my amendment?
No.
So we had heard about that discussion had occurred during one of our many work sessions, and I think that was, the concern was not is they shouldn't be responsible for something that maybe the state, the county, whoever, somebody else was responsible for. However, what my Amendment 1 is attempting to do is to not really change that responsibility, but to keep in the sequence of events, the other requirements that might be required by others. So they're still going to, all those requirements. So if the state has to make some improvement at a certain point in time, it's still listed in there. They're not then responsible if it doesn't get done, but if it was supposed to get done by such and such a time, that time frame doesn't just get waived because it's not listed in there because they weren't responsible for it. So if it was supposed to be done by January of 19 or whatever, and only once January 19 comes and goes, if they didn't get that improvement done, does that at that point allow the other things to go? So if they're getting their stuff done earlier, potentially on things, other requirements that might be expected from a timing standpoint means that those improvements would still occur.
So if you were to summarize,
Yeah,
let me think about, let me try and summarize.
Go for it. I'm so tired that right now I'm having a
Yes.
hard time.
Well, so let me try and summarize. You're saying that they're only responsible for what they're responsible for, but they cannot expedite their construction of the project before the planned completion date of the state improvement.
Or whichever's other.
Or whomever,
Correct.
the improvement that
They're
they're
not
not
responsible
responsible
for.
for, the county or state.
Correct.
Right, so
By they, we mean a developer.
developer
Correct.
can't.
Okay, and, well, I
Thank you,
appreciate
Mr.
your attempt.
Weinstein.
I'm still not
So
sure I'm following.
I'll try again. You
I do
can't-
appreciate the
The
attempt.
developer or development can't move forward faster than the planned completion date of a project they're not responsible for. So it's sort of a,
But this says the improvements that are not the responsibility of the developer shall not restrict the sequence of construction if the improvements expected completion
right.
date
So
is
it,
passed.
two things. It reinforces, as I understand it, the fact that what the administration's correction was, we can't hold the developer responsible for something they are not building.
Right, but that's what
Right,
the
but-
Amendment 1 does, right?
Right, and so, but further, I think Mr. Fox was trying to say that if, that then the developer can't just, if they are ahead of schedule, let's use that as an example, they can't necessarily finish their development if the time has not occurred for that improvement to occur, to be completed.
So basically, if the improvements expected completion date hasn't passed yet, then then they would still be on whatever that time frame is. But once it has passed and those improvements haven't been completed, then that's not restricting their sequence at that point.
Providing the maximum time possible to.
Right, because
I'm
potentially-
hearing it differently now.
Okay.
Maximum time, say that, what you said,
I heard
Mr.
it
Weinstein?
differently.
Maximum,
Before,
so
now
you're
I-
using,
you
you're
understand?
providing all the
I
time.
think so.
Yeah, I mean, because basically, basically, there could be, a known, like, whatever, a year or something like that, that the state could, state project could have been, in that sequence and expected. And because it's no longer in that sequence, or it doesn't end up in that sequence because it's not their responsibility the way it was originally written, that things could potentially, proceed without it, I think. And I'm seeing a no back there from somebody, but I don't know if.
So is this more restrictive, less restrictive?
It doesn't impact the cost side of things.
But
It doesn't impact
what
the
does it
cost
do
side
about the
of things.
timing? I mean, I thought what you were talking about is what Mr. DiLorenzo already said the amendment did. So this seems like what it's doing is saying that it won't be restricted. And I thought that you were already clarifying that the things that would restrict them are the things that they were supposed to do, not other projects. Isn't that already in Amendment 1?
It's potentially,
Unless those improvements that are not the responsibility of the developer.
I mean,
It's only those that are not responsibility of the developer shall not restrict the sequence. So it's because now they're being included in the sequence because all of them are being there.
Does the administration have a perspective on this?
I think from the administration standpoint, I think the substantive difference is lines 8 through 11, which clarifies what what happens for road improvements that the developer is not responsible for? Meaning if it's the county or the state, if the county or the state, complete its portion of a roadway, and Ms. Rex can correct me if I'm wrong, if a developer completes its portion of a roadway prior to the state or county completing its portion of a roadway, of the same roadway, then the developer will have to wait for the state or the county to complete it.
Up to the timeframe that was in the sequence of events. But once that passes, they don't have to be held, which is what your stuff was doing anyway.
Right.
Because both on was doing previously, it was already doing that. But what this is doing is at least holding to that period of time. So if, for example, it was going to be another year out, right? And now things were done, 6 months earlier, by the developer, we're not making it a year and a half or whatever it might be as it relates to that improvement. It's making sure that we're closer in time to that improvement actually happening by the state or by the county.
All right, Ms. Seedy?
Okay, so what I don't understand, Mr. Fox, as I read this and as I think about it, if this is about things that a developer doesn't have control over, we're saying that we're going to restrict your moving forward with something that you don't have control over until a date at which it was placed in some sequence or another, and the sequence, I don't
But
know
they're
what that document looks like. And so therefore, we're going to say, we're going to tell them that they can't move at a pace that works for them based on something that they don't have control over.
Yes and no. But that's not really the case, though. So it's the developer agreement, they're putting that together. It's going to have the sequence of events that has both components in it, their requirements and things that they're expecting from the state that would be, or state or county, or let's just use state for simplicity. The state to potentially be doing, I don't know, something in an interchange that they're doing versus the developer. And it's scheduled to be complete by January of 2019. And because we don't have that, and if we were having that in the sequence of events, then it would be there. But now we're only talking about them putting in things that they're responsible for in the sequence of events. So if the item that the state has in there is now taking them to January of 19, and they're done on January of 18, and that's no longer in there, they can now be starting, and that intersection improvement hasn't occurred. Now, we could get to 2019, and the state hasn't done their stuff yet, and at that point, they can move forward. They can't be held up based off the fact that it was expected and it was in the sequence of events that was laid out in the developer agreement.
Can somebody help me with a developer agreement? Our developer agreements, are they agreements between a developer and the county? Or does the state have, or is the state a signature on a developer's agreement?
The developer agreement is between the county and the developer. I think it helps to understand this amendment if you look back at the original language in the bill. If you look on
I'm trying.
If you look on page 3 of the bill, lines 26 to the end,
Right.
as originally proposed, the agreement between the developer and the county was to contain, among other things, the sequence of construction per the
Right.
plans that get approved through approval processes, right? And then if there's a failure to comply with those things, then, lots of bad things can happen to the developer. As I read Amendment 1 to Amendment 1, particularly lines 8 through 11, what this is saying is that if the improvements that the developer is not responsible for aren't completed by essentially the due date, so that could be the county's due date on a
It was put in
county
the
portion of a capital project, or the
Right.
state,
Right.
right? Because the developer doesn't have any control over that, and they haven't been completed when they were supposed to, that will not restrict the construction sequencing that the developer is obligated to meet under the developer agreement. So in effect, I
Does-
believe what the language allows is for the development that the developer controls to proceed, notwithstanding
Correct.
failures by the county or the state to complete things
What
by their
happens-
I
deadlines.
get it.
Right, but
Okay,
isn't
but
that
what
the
hap-
amendment does?
Yeah,
Isn't that what the administration's
yeah,
amendment does?
I'm
Like,
gonna-
I'm not sure what this adds.
yeah, I mean, I appreciate where you're going with this. I think at this stage in the, sort of the complexity of what's before us on Amendment 1, I'm not sure that it quite gets there, and I'd be concerned about putting something in that may have an unintended consequence, so I think if, yeah, I mean, I understand where you're going, I'm just not sure
So,
what it
so
got there.
I'm actually a little concerned about regular Amendment 1 now. I heard that differently. Can you, what does Amendment 1 do again?
Can we vote the amendment?
So,
Oh,
Amendment
two
first?
amendments?
Wow, yeah, okay, that's fine, go ahead, go ahead.
Right.
so Amendment 1 clarifies that this provision pertains to road mitigation projects that are the responsibility of the developer to build, whether they're off-site or on-site. Initially, we didn't specify that they are the responsibility of the developer to build, and we only called out off-site road improvements. This is a catch-all, right? So it's including both on-site and off-site road improvements, and it's clarifying that it applies to roads that are the responsibility of the
Right.
developer.
But it doesn't change the timing or the restriction aspect, or does it?
The original amendment.
No,
No.
no,
Okay.
so,
Yeah.
the language in the original bill, specifies with respect to sequence, right?
So sequence,
The
that's
the road mitigation project has to be done at a specified time within the development.
That's my point.
Potentially redundant.
Which
But
is,
that's the road mitigation that the developer
That the
has
developer
responsible.
is responsible
So
for.
if that mitigation, what I'm concerned with this one is if the development has a good weather and they are a couple of months ahead, they're now going to have to sit and twiddle their thumbs waiting for that deadline to come up, as opposed, and that just doesn't seem to me,
Right.
that doesn't seem reasonable.
I'm gonna call a timeout here for a second, because, I mean, I think the level of confusion on the table and at the dais suggests that perhaps this isn't quite as well defined as we need it to move it forward. So, and so Dr. Ball, did you get the answer to your
Yes, I
question
did.
relative
Thank
to main amendment 1? So, colleagues, if we can, considering we had this optimistic view of finishing now in 33 minutes, when we started this 20 minutes ago, and we're on amendment 1. So,
one to amendment.
move on to voting on amendment 1 to amendment 1?
Mr. Weinstein?
No.
Dr. Ball?
No.
Mr. Fox?
Yes.
Ms. Siggety?
No.
Ms. Tarassa?
No.
Make sure your microphone is on when you say
No.
things like that. Okay. Vote amendment 1?
Mr. Weinstein?
Yes.
Dr. Ball?
Yes.
Mr. Fox?
Yes.
Ms. Siggety?
Yes.
Ms. Tarassa?
Yes. I don't understand.
Now,
but
now we
I
seem
think
to be
it's because
having
Mr. Fox
Mr.
has,
turn your mic
do you have
off
your
for a
mic
second.
on? Is that better? It's Mr. Fox
So you two
causing the problem.
share volume.
That's what the issue's been tonight. Okay.
Okay.
Wow.
If we can all be cognizant of, apparently, yes, if you're not speaking, please turn off your mic, because now I just realized Dr. Ball and I seem to be sharing volume.
I
So-
just turned mine off.
Okay, so, all right, we'll get through this. Now.
The problem is then we forget to turn them back on, which has been the other issue.
It's one of those days. Oh, okay,
Move approval amendment 2 to amendment 1? I mean, move approval of amendment 2. Just plain old amendment 2.
Okay, second. I don't even know what that one is.
And this is the consensus amendment around an Apfo review committee. However, there is even more clarified consensus that evolved after amendment pre-file in amendment 1 to
which
amendment.
I'd like to move amendment 1 to amendment 2,
Second.
and to that.
I would have liked it if somebody shared this one with me before right now.
Oh, I apologize that you're seeing it for the first time now. There was, needless to say, a flurry of things flying around, and.
I'm just making a point.
I appreciate the point, and
So now I'm going to have the opportunity to read
You most certainly may. So I will speak to it as you are reading it. The clarification, there are really two, well, this one is, no, this is, yeah, there are two changes here, right? Ms. Philmark, we have moved its location, is that correct, or is it still, did we not catch that? We did.
Yes.
Okay, so minor thing is that we're moving it, just to where it fits into the language. And the other is that we are providing some structure to the committee itself. And I think the other elements are the same as the original amendment.
Mr. Weinstein, I'm actually asking Mr. Wimberly to go get you new copies. This was
Thank
not
you, that's-
copied double-sided, and you are missing the end of the amendment.
That's what I thought, because I was not finding the part where it's located.
Is that going to be an issue on other amendments, perhaps?
We'll find out.
It very well may be.
Okay.
Hopefully none of them are double-sided. More than 2 pages or whatever.
We try to be succinct with the amendments, particularly the amendments to the amendments.
Mr. Weinstein, do we
We
want to
can-
take a?
Yeah, so, don't watch what's going on.
Yeah.
We can't in the middle of we can
Yeah, you're
discuss
right.
more directly about Amendment 1 to Amendment 2. Okay. I'm going to make sure they're copying correctly.
We were just chatting up here about who changes the recording over to whatever it needs, like, is that
Like,
something?
change it right now would be a good time?
That was
Right.
just my thought, but then we
Yeah, I was
realized that
thinking the same
our
thing.
staff
Change
was
it or
not here, so,
Yeah.
so perhaps that's not helpful.
Somebody wants to run in.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, sorry about that, and thank you for your patience. We've got, we're missing staff.
Wait a minute, we got this one already.
Here we go.
1 to 4.
Okay, very good. So the one piece that was missing is just on the back.
Yep.
Right? Okay, so are there any questions about Amendment 1 to Amendment 2? Ms. Siggety, I know now that you've had a couple extra minutes, what's on the,
No, I
Okay.
thought, I was actually wondering if the flip side of the page added even more people to the.
no.
Yeah, so I just was counting them up.
Yep, no, it's a bit smaller group than we usually have, or at least the last time. Okay, and so, vote Amendment 1 to Amendment 2?
Hold on, did you finish going? Had you
Yes.
finished going through it?
Yes, I have finished going through it twice. All right. Okay, just want to make sure, though, that there was anything on the second page that people were concerned about. So, vote Amendment 1 to Amendment 2?
Mr. Weinstein?
Yes.
Dr. Ball?
Yes.
Mr. Fox?
Yes.
Ms. Siggety?
Sure.
Ms. Tarassa?
Yes. Yes.
Does that pass in Robert's rules?
Sure.
Okay. Now, you know we're in trouble when the office of law gets on the jokes. Okay.
Especially that part of the office a lot.
All right, folks, a little decorum. We'll try and get through this. Move Amendment 2 to Amendment 2.
Second.
Okay. This administration. This is, yeah, this is, it
Yeah,
just
I don't know
adds a
what it does.
reference to the
What does it
inclusion of
do?
other agencies.
just-
Yeah. If you want-
It mirrors, it echoes the same concept in a different, there's a different section in that provision where it would have been important to echo that concept.
Right.
So we just
Well,
wanted to.
I'm not sure I understand what you mean by that. So it adds,
So in the section where periodic review is getting added to the code and the concept of having a public committee, in the very beginning section of subtitle 1100, it would also be appropriate to mention that a public committee would be formed to provide information to the county and to the state for the purposes.
is it cross-reference or is it adding something?
It's adding a similar concept in a different,
But is it different
Part of the
people,
section.
different appointments? What's the-
no.
No, this is,
This is not, it's not appointments.
It's not appointments. This is the part that's right before that. It's just describing the process.
Yeah, who's involved in the conversations.
Why it's being,
So vote Amendment 2 to Amendment 2?
Mr. Weinstein?
Yes.
Dr. Ball?
Yes.
Mr. Fox?
yes.
Ms. Siggety?
Yes.
Ms. Tarassa?
Yes.
Vote Amendment 2 as amended.
Mr. Weinstein?
Yes.
Dr. Ball?
Yes.
Mr. Fox?
Yes.
Ms. Siggety?
Yes.
Ms. Tarassa?
Yes.
Move Amendment 3.
Second?
Do we want to do that first and then the amendment?
Sure.
Okay.
As I discussed at our last work session on APFO, I'd had the request to consider looking at the ability to redistribute housing allocations in downtown Columbia in an FDP. So what this does is allow within the first 4 years of the final development plan for the phasing to be moved around, because as it was explained, the allocations and the schools test are done when the FDP is approved, and the FDP requires them a statement of when, what they expect to build, when they expect to build it. But as we've seen in the past, the market has changed, and it's just a request for flexibility.
So is this the same, similar provision, I guess, on some of the larger development projects? I forget what size they are that are allowed to be rephased once every 4 years?
Yes.
So just, they are not subject to it based off of where they're at, and this makes them similar. It's not once every 4 years.
Right.
This is just in the
This is
first.
in the first
4
4
years,
years.
not
And
once.
then it
But
becomes.
this is without
as it
coming
is.
back for approval, right?
Right, this allows them
It's
to
similar.
phase,
It's
to
similar,
rephase it.
right. And this is only once in the, right, as it stands today.
It's
Just
once.
once versus once during a 4-year period.
Yep.
Okay.
And just, it was brought to my attention because of the FDP that was just approved for the lakefront. And as I was talking to Ms. Tarassa today about this, I went back, Ms. Tarassa, to check to see, because as we had heard at our last work session, Mr. Brownell had made the comment that information about this rephasing would happen in such a way that it could be incorporated into the projections going forward for schools, and I knew you were concerned about that. What they,
I didn't understand that. You can,
as I said, so the phasing that was approved in the FDP, then, as he said, would get included into the school projections going forward. And because of where it was approved, there would be plenty of time for those projections to be in the open-close chart and to inform inform public facilities as we go forward. What I wanted to make sure of, because one of the concerns is, well, if they started with just a few and they built from small to medium to large, you could bring a whole bunch forward and that would throw it off. In fact, what this FDP that we're looking at, that this would actually impact, started with the largest number at 300, and then it dropped to 150, I think, and then to 84. So it started with the largest number of them. Nope, sorry, 305, 120, and 84 for a little more than 500 units. So again, the idea that if they were going to rephase, they would rephase smaller as opposed to rephasing larger.
But that's just this particular project.
I
It could be-
understand, I'm just using it as an
Right,
example.
but I guess my concern is that then you would have, well, I have a couple concerns about this, but one of them is that then you could have a future larger phase come in earlier, and I'm concerned about the predictability of that for the school system and for the community.
And I understand that. I will say again that Mr. Brownell was very clear with those of us who were here at the work session that he certainly didn't think that this would be problematic, and that he was, he'd worked with us on this and was supportive, said DPZ was supportive.
So what's the logic of doing that for this and not for other developments?
That's what I just said. It already, the other developments that are larger already have that provision, I believe. That's what I was asking.
In what way do they have that provision?
There, it's in,
They can rephase.
I'd have to go to the media code for the whole thing. 'cause
Well,
it
let
wasn't
me
one
go
thing.
back to sort of my bigger concern is that my understanding throughout this process is that downtown's been off the table. So while there might have been other phasing, other allocations, other issues that I might have wanted to see readdressed, I think it's been clear throughout this process that downtown wasn't on the table and that that couldn't be done. So my concern here is that in an amendment, now we're suddenly addressing an area that it's been pretty, I mean, there have been people who've asked me throughout the time that we've been working on this, what about downtown, what about this, what about that? So, but we were told that was off the table, and so, to me, this is a little out of nowhere to be starting to talk about downtown now. And there's certainly things that I would have liked to address if we were addressing downtown.
I was just going to suggest, since I'm not sure everybody's has seen these, even though they've been posted and all, is just to go through, because I would have just asked these questions anyway, as far as the ABCD and actually the stuff on the next page, it's still the requirements that are still there. It probably is worth reviewing those.
The requirements, so you're talking about the total number of housing allocations?
Yeah, so this is the
Right.
stuff that, yes, they can, you're saying that they
They
can do
can-
it, but it's still subject to this,
Right,
all these
that
Right,
in
things.
we can
fact,
move
the-
them forward.
Right, but in fact, that they don't get any additional units as a result of this, only what they've been granted under the FDP. That they have to hit all of their milestones, that the redistribution complies with the downtown revitalization phasing progression requirements, so they can't go out, they can't build more residential than they're allowed before they build commercial and office, and that the SEPA requirements are met. So it's not, it's simply allowing for those 500 units, or whatever units are granted at the FDP within the first 4 years, because of market forces, to be able to be redesigned into different size buildings.
Okay, no, thank you for the additional explanation. Mr. Ross, would you like to?
Move Amendment 1 to Amendment 3.
Second.
This amendment proposes to limit the redistribution of residential units to those FDPs which are not utilizing SEPA flexibility provisions. So a lot of times, the SEPAs that we assigned in the 2010 plan are somehow postponed, or there's some other flexibility going on. And I just think that if they're going to take advantage of this, they should be fulfilling those requirements
Yes, sir.
in conjunction with that.
I think, Ms. Tarassa, that the amendment as written says that they do in fact have to meet their requirements. And I believe that, and I understand, I believe that the plan does allow for alternate compliance. And what you're saying here is you can only have flexibility in your buildings if you meet the requirements with no alternate options.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, because a lot of times those alternate requirements are postponing doing something, like the pathway or something else. So I think it makes sense, if they want flexibility in the allocations, that they should meet the SEPA requirements in that.
And I think I would respectfully disagree with your characterization of SEPA flexibility. I've been at planning board meetings where they've seriously considered it, and sometimes they've granted it, and sometimes they haven't, and sometimes they've made the SEPA more onerous than it was before. So I think that those decisions are in good hands with our planning board.
So, Mr. Russell, other than the posting of security to fulfill any required SEPA, what other alternates, I just can't remember, which other alternates are you talking about? Other than
Delayed
those?
delayed implementation or delayed building of the required, so for example, the pathway. So I think if they're delaying the implementation, if what their alternative compliance is to do it later, then we shouldn't be giving flexibility in the allocations.
And I would suggest to you that in that particular example, the reason they could not move forward was A, that somebody would not sell them an easement, and B, they ended up in court. So I don't know how, in fact, one can meet that. And if everything had stopped, or if something had stopped because of that, those were some of the examples of what could happen, which is why we had some flexibility with the SEPAs.
But
I'm
but
not
actually,
sure- I'm not sure we need to relitigate too much.
Right,
more.
I mean-
I don't know if that'll change the votes. of-
Well, actually, both, actually, as they've been talking, it's like, I was that way, but
Yeah,
then
so-
there was the other part
So
of
that-
the issue of
right.
that some things they don't have control over. So I see where Ms. Truss is coming from, but then if it's something that they don't have control over, then, you know,
Well,
then
okay.
then unless there's a way to address that in the amendment, then I would have a concern with the amendment. If outside of that, I see what you're saying. I mean, we're giving them flexibility in general and in the rephasing to then potentially put off or something else, something that would have been required. I see where you're coming from, but some things, if they don't have.
Right.
They may or may not have had that ability to deal with it then anyway.
Have we seen that this is a problem?
What is?
I mean,
The amendment that you're putting in, is that solving a problem?
The request was that in reality, it could solve a problem because of the existing, the brand-new FDP, where they made assumptions, yet they don't know what the market is going to bear.
we can still change them. It's about whether they need to come back when they change them. Right?
I mean, one of the reasons, this was not one of the draft ones that we kind of went through, so that's why I think it's
Right,
just helpful
but
to.
right, but I did, you recall, bring it up at our work session because, and shared the idea and had Mr. Brownow here to talk through it with us as well.
Right.
Right, and I guess just back to the SEPA compliance, I mean, as you recall with the pathway, and we don't have to relitigate the whole thing, but certainly the idea that they would need the easements was well discussed in 2010. And so the fact that, the discussion was that that would then hold up the development. They wouldn't be able to move forward until that was done. I think in the end, there was some flexibility built in, but I don't think the idea was that they could then, I mean, that was well known that they had an easement that they needed to deal with. I don't know if that addresses your concern, Mr. Fox, but it's not preventing them from moving forward. It's just preventing them from taking advantage of a flexibility that then they wouldn't have to come back to us.
No, I understood that, but that's what I was saying. I saw where you were going with that, but then the part there that if the need for flexibility may have had to do with somebody, again, going back to what we were talking about before, somebody else not
Right.
providing an easement, not doing something that they didn't have control over, then that would be a concern.
Okay,
But
so-
it's, again, it's not keeping them from doing it, it's just keeping them from taking advantage of the flexibility.
I understand.
And I don't think that they were not getting the easements, I think they were delayed.
Okay.
And that was
yeah,
part of
so
the discussion.
It's a very specific point you're talking about, but is there anything else you needed, Mr. Fox? You were looking for some clarification from both parties? Okay, so if we can move to vote on Amendment 1 to Amendment 3?
Mr. Weinstein?
No?
Dr. Ball?
Yes.
Mr. Fox?
Well, like you must have your mic on. There you go. That's how we could keep each other quiet, huh? We just put each other, put our mic.
Right, Mr. Fox, now I've got it.
I'll make you quiet, but, well, I generally like, where you're going with it. I don't, because of those other concerns not really being able to be addressed, in the amendment, and I don't think it being a big enough issue, I vote no.
Ms. Siggety?
No.
Ms. Tarassa?
Yes.
Vote Amendment 3.
Mr. Weinstein?
Yes.
Dr. Ball?
No.
Mr. Fox?
Because this is very similar to the phasing that's allowed with other similar type projects, yes.
Ms. Siggety?
Yes.
Ms. Tarassa?
Yeah, I believe those other projects would then have to come back for that permission that they're being flexed out of, so no.
Okay. Move to approve Amendment 20 to Council Bill 60.
Second.
Okay, yeah, I'll just, this amendment it puts in a capacity chart at 105% for elementary schools, 110% for middle schools, and 115% for high schools. A couple other minor additions to add to the language in the bill high school test. And I'll just speak a little bit to Amendment 1, and then I'll move it. And that is, there was one insertion of the word and high school, and high, that was missed, so a couple of items that were missed, so that's what Amendment 1 will do. So move Amendment 1 to Amendment 20.
Second.
So we have both before us. Again, the Amendment 1 is just a,
Drafting it, right?
it's drafting error. So let's let's vote on Amendment 1 to 20. Amendment 20?
Mr. Weinstein?
Yes.
Dr. Ball?
Yes.
Mr. Fox?
Yes.
Ms. Siggety?
Yes.
Ms. Tarassa?
Yes. I think you still have your mic on. Yes.
Okay.
So, you going to discuss this, or?
If discussion is,
Well, I guess the question is, do we have we gotten any information on what this does and when as a result of these particular numbers? Do we have a map? Do we have anything
we
to
have, yeah,
understand
there were
the-
maps that were, I mean, these maps have been, these are probably some of the earlier maps that we have. Right.
Huh?
These are some of the earlier maps that we have. Can probably go back to September, if not before that. Well, we're looking at generally what different levels there were. So I can't give you a specific date, but that information's been,
So what does it end up looking like? I mean, what ends up being closed and when?
it looks, I think Ms. Siggety probably has one handy, but it looks pretty close. Oh,
Pretty close to what?
pretty closed.
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 Does in fact look pretty closed. So,
Sure you're.
Mr. Fox, this is what it looks like.
What level is that?
This represents Amendment 20. So.
For elementary, middle, or high?
For all three combined.
Okay.
Okay, and so every area that's colored is closed. The areas that are white with the dots on them are open.
That's at 5, 10, and
5, 10, and 15.
What year? At what year?
All right, so I will say that I don't know what year, Mr. Fox, this was. Mr. DiLorenzo and Mr. Brownow helped me to look at what this would look like. And so when we did, Mr. DiLorenzo, if you would help, when we did the maps.
Right.
We were looking, and when I asked you for 105, 110.
Right.
Right, and when we asked you for those numbers, I'm
Right.
assuming all the maps were done the same way, which was looking at the closed schools at a moment in time. And is it at this year's open-close chart?
The year 2020. So the
2020.
so the testing year.
Yeah.
But not under the amendment. The amendment would delay the implementation,
1 year.
right? So it wouldn't be 2020, it would be the next.
Well, so the 2021 numbers aren't available yet. So
So
we-
I think
2020
The projections
is really
are,
the only
yeah.
year we could have
Well, you have
built the
projections.
maps off of.
I don't anticipate that the subsequent year is going to
Right.
be less than this year.
Right.
So potentially could close additional.
Right. And at the moment, the only thing that's open is areas outside of the planned service area. And so it basically closes the county.
And then it's also, the information we don't have, Mr. Ross, is what the Board of Education is going to decide.
Right.
in,
Right.
you
Yes,
know,
some things
next
could
week.
change, but at this point, with the information that we have.
So, just looking through it here, hold on.
But part of the issue isn't just what opens and closes, because I think if we've got crowded schools, it's incumbent upon the board to redistrict and for us to fund new schools. So the reality is, what we should be discussing is whether 105, 110, and 115 in a school makes sense, not just what opens and closes.
I don't disagree to a certain extent, but the other thing is we don't control the redistricting. And I guess this is one of the things that, I guess, this is as good a time as any to put out there, is regardless of what we do, the school board has the ability to redistrict to the best needs of the kids in the community based off of what they believe is right. That's not our purview to determine that. And regardless of what we do in here, still wouldn't dictate or change that. I mean, never has. I mean, it's not something that is incumbent upon them to, if we were to tell them, they would tell us it's not our business as far as that goes. And I guess I would proffer that regardless of what we vote on tonight or not vote tonight or whatever it is, that they're going to do what they're going to do when they do it. And I think, the belief that it's anything but that is some sort of falsehood that's been, put out there in the community. I mean, I don't understand, why there is that belief. If you believe that, then they would have done some redistricting prior. There was nothing that stopped them from redistricting prior to now. They used to redistrict on a very regular basis. And instead, what they've done is, put it off until things have gotten to where they've gotten to. Now, I would say that, some of the development stuff some of it's development related. You look at, the stuff with Turf Valley, and that was a 1986 decision. It wasn't one of our decisions. And they had plenty of time to know that was coming. It's not like it was a shock to anybody, since that's been a provision since 1986. And, I'm just, right now, we're looking at these numbers and seeing the maps and going, if that's what the intent was, because I haven't heard anybody say the intent was to shut down all development. I've been concerned about a lot of, through various zoning decisions, ZRA votes and everything else, some of the developments that have been approved that I've fought against, that many others have supported. So for me, it's not that, but you went and approved that development, and now what you're talking about is all of a sudden shutting it all down. I'm just
So
trying to understand it.
I will agree with your contention that our decisions here cannot drive any more direct decision-making by the Board of Education. Absolutely. It's been a point that I brought up many times, that what we're trying to do is achieve or maintain or have some level of balance between the responsibilities, authority of both bodies, and there's just so much we can do. It has been certainly it's a difficult. What I attempted in this amendment was to look at what the task force came up with, what the community was asking for, and look for something that was somewhere in between. In each scenario, it is very challenging to achieve both an appropriate adjustment to the pace of development and finding the compelling reason for the Board of Education to do the redistricting that is well within their purview. And as you point out, in the charts and for years have been indicated that some level of redistricting is needed. So all that being said, we are faced with the environment, to what Mr. Ross was saying. We're faced with the environment that we're in today, and that's, I mean, I'm not going to refute anything you've just said. I'm just trying to find that.
And I understand what you're saying, and I guess the
spot
part
in the middle
that,
there.
and you know me, I love the numbers and love being in these
Oh,
spreadsheets, so.
Mr. Fox, you know I've spent about 5 hours in the last 2 days talking only numbers. So I
have two with
yes.
Yeah, that's why you're seeing me so exhausted right now. I'm about out of energy. I mean, I see concerns when you're sitting there with multiple schools that are within the same area being at super high numbers. You definitively have got to do something as it relates to that, and it probably should have been done a long time ago in stopping. And I don't dispute, for example, the need for a high school test. I think I've said that pretty openly in a number of meetings at this point. But you also, the other thing is, since we don't, it's almost like there's got to be that provision that's something that's within the region or within something that and the problem is, as going through this, is I'm not sure without at this point, what that right number would be at the region-wide, the region side of things.
Yeah,
So
I'm
we're
gonna,
talking about the numbers.
Yeah, no, I'm
and
going to
stuff.
interrupt you for a second, because on the region side, I think, one of the conversations we've had even just today, in which I think bears further and future conversations, and hopefully maybe a conversation with the Board of Education, the regions are a false construct. I mean, it's just simply, as we learn,
Yes.
there was developed by somebody 30 years ago who just needed to come up with a construct for how to organize the schools into groups. I think it's worthy of an additional conversation, not tonight, about how we look at that, and in part of what we're looking at, what's in here about implementing this with a new chart, is we do have some time to work with the Board of Education. There's certainly, we can only provide them some thoughts on the matter, sort of like they provided us. But we have to, they'll have to act on making some of those changes to the regions. Or I suppose there is some purview we can take in how we do that too. But we have to align how we look at things with how they look at things.
Right, but getting to the point where you potentially may close something, I don't know, we'll just looking at some of the stuff on, middle schools, where you might have something that's whatever, over that 110%, sitting at 110, and the region itself is below 100%. It's in the 90s, and you got schools in the 80s, and you're going to then, close a school that's at 110 when you're sitting there with capacity at 3 other schools.
Well, I'm hopeful, and in this
so-
conversation, and we've had many conversations over the last few months with the board together. The board has been an observer in some of these conversations while we've been at work sessions and what have you. But I think one of the things that we've come back to is their own policy of 90 to 110%, and perhaps a greater adherence to using that as their guidepost, and looking at where the schools' capacity are now, and try and do just that. So that's, I mean, that's, we're sort of going through the entire argument that's been going on in my head for months, and that is, how do we achieve that balance? And I don't think, to be blunt, I don't think this necessarily does either, but it puts it in a place to at least take some steps to to address the
And I
concern
guess
in
that's
front
what,
of us.
and I guess that's what you just said is actually what concerns me. I think we've made a lot of progress, and there's been a lot of great ideas and, going on. And, with mulch, you're right. We ourselves have been working on that on and off now for over 3 years. This, while we all knew it's going, we all had representatives on there and everything else on the task force, and we've known it's coming. We've spent a crap load of time on it, but it's all been, recent, and we continue to have additional questions, and we keep getting data. And the thing with the whole thing with the regions was really something that was more today. First time, I mean, we talked about some of the stuff with the adjacency, but the concept of how it might work, where some of the conversations today, I haven't even had a chance to, talk to anybody other than, 2 or 3 people on them. And I guess that's why I'm just trying to understand, as it relates to, the timing, so many times with complicated things such as this that impact, this type of planning, the amount of emails that we usually would get is, hey, you guys take your time. And I'm just trying to understand where this, because there's nothing that we do right now that's going to impact anything really until the next chart vote. And so I'm just trying to understand why we wouldn't at this point take some of the stuff that that we've now learned and spend the additional time on it. That's I guess what I'm asking, because I don't think anybody, when I'm asking and asking about these maps, is it the intent to shut down all of development? I mean, I haven't heard that say. But that's what we're doing, and so, are potentially doing. Again, we really don't know, especially since at this point we don't even know what they're doing on the redistricting side. So we're sort of playing with all the cards in the deck at this point.
If I might.
Proceeding.
So I have real concerns with this. My concern is that we are in fact shutting down development. Now, I have heard over and over how important it is for us to have seats in schools, and I get that. But what I don't think folks realize is that when were we to shut down development through Amendment 20, or even some of the other ones, that what'll happen is not that schools will and seats will immediately and miraculously appear, but if we lower the threshold, thereby containing development, what happens is those seats get pushed way out, because you have to have enough student population in order to be able to populate new schools. You have to show a level of population overage in your schools in order to get state help with additions. And so when I look at something like this, I'm now wondering and worrying, is the cost of all the seats that people want going to fall directly on the taxpayers of Howard County? Will we lose our advantage for being able to receive state funds? And if it does fall on us, does in fact this, how does that impact everyone's taxes as we go forward? So that's one piece of it. The other piece that I am concerned about is the is doing something like this and the creating of a false sense of accomplishment. Right? I look at this and people are saying, yes, do it, because this is going to solve our problem. Well, I don't see it as solving our problem, and I see it as creating more problems for us. And so if I'm looking at this, I'm going, why are we doing it?
I mean,
So, can I?
Ms. Toronto.
Yeah, I guess a couple things that I would say. First of all, I think what it is a compromise, because there's some of us that think it should be a lower number than this. And so I think that's partially how we got to where we are. But I guess the other thing is, and I heard a little differently, and I know you have the experience on the school board, but I heard a little differently what Renee Kamens was saying and others were saying about what you need in order to get funding for a school. And I just want to sort of sidestep for that for a second, and that is that we've got 142 relocatables in elementary school, 60 in middle school, and 36 in high school. So I find it hard to believe that we wouldn't be able to fill schools. We've got so many kids out in our relocatables at this point that I think that's not, I don't think that's going to be the issue that you think it is. I mean, those should not be permanent structures. I think we've talked about that for a long time. And when you have that many, what's that, 238? Mr. Fox isn't even doing math for me now. But I think that's 248 relocatables that are supposed to be temporary. I think we certainly have kids to fill school seats.
Well, I'm also concerned as we do this, that in fact, we are not taking into account information that we heard and saw, and the data shows, is that the increase in student population is coming more from resales than from new construction. And so ultimately, again, what does that mean in terms of where will the costs fall? Right? They will not fall on new construction as we need to build, but they'll fall on the rest of us.
Right.
And in addition, the other piece of this, and I'm sorry I have to.
Go
because-
ahead.
All right, the
It's
other piece of this
important enough.
is, when we did Apfo to begin with, and we slowed growth in Howard County, we saw an increase in the cost of housing in Howard County. And if I'm looking at this and I'm thinking about this, I am wondering what happens when there isn't new construction to be purchased, but in fact our older neighborhoods. Now, I'm going to admit that what I'm going to say would benefit me, because I live in an older neighborhood, I live in affordable housing. And maybe I should sit back and say, well, whoopee-doo, my house is going to be worth more. But whoopee-doo, my house is going to be worth more, and so people, what we're doing is inflating again the cost of housing in Howard County, and we're becoming an ever-increasing entitled community and an exclusive community, and I'm having a very hard time with that.
I don't know if that's actually the case. I mean, I think a couple of those points I would probably dispute.
And so if you're going to make another point, sir, if you can do it briefly. No, and I appreciate it. I'm also looking at your face and recognizing that you're tired like the rest of us. And we do have several more amendments to go through.
Yeah, I think there's more, it's a broader discussion on the overall. It's not something necessarily for each amendment either. Yeah.
Sure. No.
And stuff.
Would be
But-
great if the remaining amendments don't get as much.
Yeah, I'm not sure, I mean, I know we have there's been some evidence as it relates to existing housing stock, but I don't know if we've determined definitively that it's more from that versus from new construction. But there's just so many other, there's.
Sorry.
Yes,
I would-
thank you.
I apologize.
And my point is, even if you were to go grab some of that, my point, we talked about the domino effect associated with some of the new housing, and it's still, yielding stuff in some of the existing housing. So we don't have it that defined as far as there's some folks that, it's definitely there, because we can see it with some of the numbers in places where things haven't been built. But I went back and looked. Mr. Bronow had put together the PowerPoint that we all had in the work session that he had updated in October that showed where all the elementary schools, were actually did it for all of them, but he overlaid the housing, new housing that occurred during that same 3-year period from 2013 to 2016. And as I went back and looked at the ones that were now in the red, that were up over 110. The first 3 had 2 units, 0 units, and 0 units built, and had not been, 2 of the 3 had not been overcrowded prior. There was capacity changes there having to do with either program shifts or other things that we have no control over, again, at all, and how some of this capacity, issues are changing. And so, as you're looking at that, the first exception to that is Manor Woods, and Manor Woods is mostly related to the situation, as I said before, with Turf Valley. And then the next ends up being Duckett's Lane, and that was Oxford Square. And I think, Oxford Square is one of the ones that, I had concerns about back when it was approved, and we see what it did to really a lot of the spikes and a lot of the numbers as it related to that. And that's where a high school test, I would agree, potentially would have helped. I'm just saying that with the exact numbers, and if we have some things having to do with regions, it should be overlaid as well. I can't propose the numbers right now because I would have to still get a significant amount of information, having to do with these. I don't know if it makes sense to talk about the region concept here now.
No, I don't think it does. I mean, it's a little bit more, no, and it's.
I think it's
a good point.
important for the community to hear.
Well, I
that's
think,
all.
I think it's important here, and I think that doesn't mean that we can't talk about it soon, but just that this is relevance to our conversation right now, I would say no. And so I would like to, colleagues, if we can, to move to a vote on Amendment 20. So, Ms.
That would be
Feldmark?
Amendment 20 as amended.
As amended, Amendment 20, vote Amendment 20 as amended.
Mr. Weinstein.
Yes.
Dr. Ball.
Yes.
Mr. Fox.
Pass.
Ms. Siggety.
No.
Ms. Tarassa.
Yes.
Coming back to me?
Did you, Mr. Fox?
No.
All right, move Amendment 7.
Second.
Amendment 7 just aligns some of the languages to HCPSS policies that are already in place.
I'm sorry.
Like how Apfo capacity is defined.
No, I was
and
just trying to figure out which
Oh.
number you were on.
7.
Thanks. I think that's fine.
There are no amendments to this.
Nope.
Any other questions for Dr. Ball?
In light of what we just passed.
On 7.
I mean, I think, I was going to just say, it looks like the first thing is sort of redundant because capacity is defined. I mean, I don't know why it ends up being there when it's based off of that in the first place. I'm just curious.
No, I mean, I just selected the things that the Board of Ed and school system requested that aligned with their current policies.
No, I guess because program capacity is a definition, and the definition states what it is, and actually that's where you change those things, which I would agree with your changes. And I agree with the second part of the amendment. I just didn't understand why we were, every time we have a definition, that we would then say what that sort of restate that definition. It's not even a full, I'm just trying to understand why that was.
So you think it's duplicative, not problematic?
Right.
Correct. I mean, it's not a big deal. I'm just trying to understand if there was something.
Making sure there wasn't some
There's some
other
other
intent
reason
on
I'm
it,
missing that why it was there.
Just consistency or alignment, Dr. Ball?
Yeah.
So I guess what I would say is if it's not problematic, I think we have other amendments to discuss. So
No, I just want to make sure there wasn't some
Yeah.
other, there wasn't
No.
a reason.
Nope.
If there wasn't a reason and it just ends up being duplicative, I don't care enough.
Okay, good. Well, given that point of information,
That's
move,
your out loud voice, Mr. Fox.
let's
Hey,
go to a,
mine's always out that loud. There is no.
unless I
pulling
turn the
punches.
microphone on.
Mr. Fox doesn't have thought bubbles. They're all
Mr.
spoken
Weinstein.
words. Yes.
Dr. Ball.
Yes.
Mr. Fox.
Yes.
Ms. Siggety.
Yes.
Ms. Tarassa.
Yes. I think your mic's still on.
Yes, on purpose. Just
That was yes, in case you couldn't hear me.
Move to approve Amendment 8 to Council Bill.
Second.
This is
So-
administration.
Yes, so the administration filed Amendment 8. So the term capacity utilization has become a quite significant term that we've been discussing over the last few months during this debate. And we realized it is not a term that is defined in the code, so we thought it warranted a proper definition in the code and reference in the code. So that's what Amendment 8 does.
Good, thank you.
So before you go further, I just want to make sure, because I didn't have a chance to double check it, is you approved Amendment 20. Was there anything there that needed to redefine in 20, in Amendment 8? Did Amendment 8 need to be amended to address anything in 20?
I'm looking now.
You know
I
what I'm
don't
saying?
think, yeah, I know what you're saying. No, I do not think so, not at all. Is there,
So there actually are a few references to projected enrollment in Amendment 8. There are
Yeah, actually, it does.
Amendment 20, I'm
yeah.
sorry.
Bottom of page 1,
Right.
it does actually.
So I'm just reading it
So
myself.
you would also want to change that as well, I believe.
About a reference?
So,
So if you were looking on Amendment 20, bottom of page 1,
and this needs to come out. Right.
sorry, I actually put together a mega Word doc that had everything, so
So just to be consistent with how we define capacity utilization in the code, how Amendment 20 would be amended for the school region, the elementary school, middle, and high school, the term projected enrollment would be replaced with capacity utilization, and the of the program capacity following the percent would be removed. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be.
Are you
It's
talking
just-
about on line 12?
If you want to use the
yeah.
defined
If you
term,
want.
that would be a
Right.
way to
It's fine,
incorporate
that's
it, but it
something that we
doesn't
could,
change the meaning.
it could potentially be cleaned up at a later date. It doesn't affect the substance of the past amendment or this
No.
amendment going forward.
Just for the definition, just
Right.
for the definition,
Okay,
if you wanted to use the definition.
right. Mr. Cook, do you have any thoughts on the matter? Just to ensure that we haven't created a conflict with the, in legal terms, no, we have created potential conflicts elsewhere. And I'm satisfied with what our staff and the administration has offered in terms of this is a definition that's available to us and does not affect the content or substance of the one we passed previously.
So did you look at your proposed definition in connection with any of the other amendments?
No, I just looked at it in the context
Of the term.
Of the term and the current law.
One option is to not pass 8 if we're concerned about the disconnect, and then we can potentially come back at a later time just to clean up terminology as needed. If Mr. Cook, if you're concerned about, again, it seems definitional and not substance.
No, I was just looking at whether the ratio expression in Amendment 8
Causes an
will
issue.
be understood in terms of enrollment projections below a certain percentage. Because that's what 20 does. It's not really a sufficiency issue as much as it is perhaps clarity,
Consistency.
which is actually,
It's below 1% of the program capacity, which is the ratio they're using in the definition.
So are you saying it's okay that way, Ms. Feldmark, or?
I
If that's
think
what
if
she's
you-
suggesting.
I don't think it is inconsistent
Okay.
to adopt Amendment 8. You will not be using the defined term capacity utilization everywhere you could, but you are expressing the same concept in Amendment 20.
Right. That's right.
So is program capacity in your definition the same as it is in 20, Amendment 20?
Correct, yes, it is.
Okay. Very good. Thank you for clarifying that, Mr. Fox. Thanks for making sure we cross that T and dotted the I. So we, it seems it's okay to pass 8 while Amendment 20 might not use the exact same definition.
All right.
So with that, vote Amendment 8.
Mr. Weinstein?
Yes.
Dr. Ball?
Yes.
Mr. Fox?
Yes.
Ms. Siggety?
Yes.
Ms. Tarassa?
Yes.
Move to approve Amendment 9 to Council Bill 61.
Second.
Move to,
Are you going to move your?
Okay, move Amendment 1 to Amendment 9.
Second.
So that, this proposes to require an explanation of capacity utilization changes.
yeah. Right, okay. And so, just in context with actual Amendment 9, it's just over the various work sessions and honestly through the last couple of years and going through all the information that we usually receive from the school, just making sure we sort of codified what we expected to see on a regular basis. So that's what in toto the amendment and the amendment to the amendment do. Okay, so vote Amendment 1 to Amendment 9?
Mr. Weinstein?
Yes.
Dr. Ball?
Yes.
Mr. Fox?
Yes.
Ms. Siggety?
Yes.
Ms. Tarassa?
Yes.
Vote Amendment 9 as amended?
Mr. Weinstein?
Yes.
Dr. Ball?
Yes.
Mr. Fox?
Yes.
Ms. Siggety?
Yes.
Ms. Tarassa?
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. I got you. I know. Move to approve Amendment 10.
Second.
Okay. Mr. Austin, did you want to talk through this one?
This amendment proposes including a requirement for a public meeting on the school facilities that reach a capacity of 95% with a projection of more than 110 within 5 years. So the school board had asked for us to have, to commit to some funding that we are not legally permitted to do, but I felt strongly that, and obviously several of my colleagues agreed, that that discussion should take place early and in a joint way, and a public and joint way, so that everybody, all the stakeholders are together coming up with a, discussing a plan for moving forward.
So I don't have a problem with the general concept. I just have to laugh that we just keep creating more, meetings upon meetings.
And
when-
as I suggested to you earlier, we would combine this with another planned meeting with the Board of Education.
I'm sitting there
but,
going, well, yeah, why wouldn't this be part of our quarterly BOE thing?
it could very well be.
There's no reason it couldn't be.
But that's not a,
No, well,
that-
that's not.
that's not
probably
by code. I mean,
By
it's not-
code, but,
yeah.
or that is part of, we have for budget, because we typically, you get these things at budget and have a public hearing on them, as well as when they have to submit, for example, like the capital stuff even today. For today, that which be, a few months after, that as part of that, why wouldn't that just all be part of what comes, what we do? It just, I won't be here for those meetings.
and
but,
for those meetings, I'm actually going to miss you if I am,
so,
so.
but I'm
it's-
just, I just.
Yeah, I think it's,
debating how much I want to punish future councils, just for fun.
Right, well, I think, that- I mean, to your point, though, this is, the information you have, it's another opportunity to focus a conversation on this, which is where we would both bring our shared responsibility to the table and can have those conversations. And if that's the only topic on the table, I think it's as helpful. I understand the irony you see in this is, but
I just
it's
have
an
to-
opportunity, so.
So I have to agree with Mr. Fox on this one. I just really have to start laughing about it, because we did this,
Yep.
by the way, and it didn't, I don't see that it did us much good,
We did
given
this.
the capital budget that we got. We had these specific conversations as part of APFO. And so and we've had them over time at budget time when we've asked about their plan, about what were they going to be doing, the capital program, we have it at budget time all the time. And the concept here is that people would get together and talk about it. Mr. Weinstein, you just said, or that there would be a joint talking about it and a suggestion of what could be done, but the reality is, I'm going to go back to, as Mr. Cook said, we don't have any control over this except at budget time. And so this just seems as though it's one more meeting. But
Well, and
but if
appreciate,
you're all you want to do
Or
it, that's
written
fine, I won't be
or
here
written
either.
notification. I mean, we
Okay.
get the feasibility study every June.
Right.
Every June, that's our notification on
Well, we
what everything's going to be.
okay,
It's all-
folks,
it's all laid out there in
I
the
think
chart.
you've made your point. And so if we can come to a vote, I would appreciate moving forward on the remaining amendments that we have before
fun
us.
with it.
Yep, there you
Mr.
go.
Weinstein,
Yes.
Dr. Ball,
Yes.
Mr. Fox.
Out of principle, I mean, well, it doesn't hurt anything. At the same time, we get the stuff, I don't understand. It's like we have to now spell out everything that should be a logical projection of what the board should be discussing with us for concerns. So just from that perspective, no.
Ms. Siggety,
No,
Ms. Tarassa.
Okay, I mean, I'd have to laugh as well at you all. I don't understand what the problem would be in bringing all the stakeholders together. I mean, this also includes the executive branch, and it also includes a proposal by the board to address the projected overcrowding and the solution. So I can't see what the harm in it is, and I think it's going to be helpful, so yes.
Move approval of Amendment 13.
Second.
Move approval of Amendment 1 to 13.
Second.
Yeah.
Okay, well, amendment, do I want to discuss them both? I could. So Amendment 1 just adjusts the maximum number of years, the combined wait time for certain projects. So this was, the administration had proposed a combined cap. In other words, if a project had waited 5 or fewer years, the most schools could add to it would get you to 5 years if they'd waited for allocation. So after 5 years of allocations, there would be no schools test, and that I was concerned about. So this is sort of a graduated approach. This says that if a project is waited 3 or fewer years, there's a maximum of 6 years wait. If it's waited 4 or 5 years, there's a maximum of 7 years wait, and anything beyond that, those 5 years, we wanted to make sure that there was at least 1 year wait if a school was closed.
Thank you, Mr. Rossman. Any questions, colleague? Ms. Siggety?
so what you're saying is that for a project that's waited 3 years or less for allocations and then tested for 2 years of schools, you want them to wait another year? Because that's how I'm reading this.
Which one are you reading that way?
I'm looking at your Amendment 1. So
And
on,
with
Our amendment, but yes.
yeah.
no, I'm looking at your Amendment 1
Oh,
to
one.
Amendment 13.
Okay, yes, sorry.
On
Okay,
page 1 in line 12, strike 5 and put in 6.
right.
So what you're saying is that if they waited 3 years or less, then tested once, then tested twice, you want them to now test 3 times. So you want to push out from 5 to 6 years.
From what was proposed in the bill, yes. Right now, if they'd waited that long, they could wait up to 4 years for school, so yes.
Right, and what's proposed, and so you wanted to, and what was proposed in the bill was a longer wait, and you now want to make it even longer.
A longer wait than what?
Well, at APFO now, you wait 4
Okay.
years. The
Right,
bill
but it did-
proposes
right.
5.
So what happened was there was but in exchange for that, there was a combined total. And since there's that combined total, I thought 6 and 7 years, and then 1 year for schools after that made sense.
Hearing no other questions, why don't we move to vote on Amendment 1 to Amendment 13?
Mr. Weinstein,
Yes.
Dr. Ball.
Yes.
Mr. Fox.
I think it'd be different if we didn't have the numbers that we have in there, that were approved in 20, because now what you're talking about is, the way the test ends up going, and then the allocations, looking at them in conjunction, I've got a concern, I guess that would be with this amendment. I think I could potentially support the amendment to the amendment and the amendment if there was more, if there was more thought and understanding in the impacts of the school test. But so with that, I vote no.
Ms. Siggety.
No.
Ms. Tarassa.
Yes.
Vote Amendment 13 as amended?
Mr. Weinstein,
Yes.
Dr. Ball.
Yes.
Mr. Fox.
As previously stated reasons, no.
Ms. Siggety.
No.
Ms. Tarassa.
Yes. Yes. Mr. Fox, you did it again. Yes. So I think 14 has.
Yeah, no, we're.
First 14
we're
distributed, okay.
To 15.
Move approval of amendment. Move approval of Amendment 15.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Weinstein. So, colleagues, I looked a little further into our Adequate Public Facilities Ordinance and what our responsibilities are. And as I stated before, I'm very concerned about what's going to happen with housing and how we become more exclusive. And state law that gives us the permission to create adequate public facilities ordinances states to encourage the preservation of natural resources or the provision of affordable housing and to facilitate orderly development and growth. The local jurisdiction can create laws requiring, number one, the planning, staging, or provision of adequate public facilities and affordable housing. State law is really clear that, to my mind anyway, that providing adequate public facilities and affordable housing are both goals that need to be met under the state enabling legislation. So in fact, what this amendment does is to exempt projects that are 40% or greater affordable housing projects that are attempting to be built or either have or are attempting to get federal and state dollars in order to be able to move forward and to meet the goals of affordable housing. And this one's particularly important because of the very long conversation that we had in the 4-1 vote that we had about using housing tax credits as a way of providing affordable housing in downtown Columbia. And so if in fact, based on 20 that passed earlier today, if we don't figure out a way to also provide affordable housing, we're not meeting the permissions that we're given in state law. And so from my perspective, what this does is to allow for a project that already has the promise of federal and state money and is 100 units or less to move forward. If in fact it doesn't have the promise but wants to try to get federal or state dollars. It, the Director of Planning and Zoning, if in fact it's 100 units or less, has the discretion to approve it. And if it's more than 100 units, then the council by resolution and public hearing can waive the Adequate Public Facilities Schools test, so that in fact, a project can move forward, and then we can meet our obligations under the state law, but more importantly, we can meet our obligations to affordable housing in Howard County, which has been a huge topic of conversation. So with that, I would ask that we vote it.
So, the way I'm looking at it is pretty much everything else is shut down, and we're going to just build affordable housing, and that concerns me. And from a tax-based standpoint, and for whatever is moving forward, already has MIHU requirements, so it's not like MIHUs are not being built.
This is not MIHUs.
I understand that, but they still are covering some of those same things. And so, I think there could be some other things that could be looked at, but as other things that, tonight that, I don't think people are looking to get into new concepts. So, something that could be revisited, and, just generally speaking, it could be something that where the council has, maybe has decided to approve a payment in lieu of taxes, which has occurred with a number of other, with most of the other similar type projects. So the council, it could be if the council has agreed to a pilot. So at that point, the council will have made an affirmative decision that that project is then important. Something along those lines, could make sense. But, based off of everything else in this whole package right now, I would have to, I can't see how I could support that.
Well, Mr. Fox, I've been looking for years for a way to incentivize affordable housing. And so if this were to incentivize affordable housing in Howard County, I'd be a happy person. But then,
Before the last general plan, there was a pot of housing for affordable housing. Well, that was for MIHUs. Certainly a similar pot could be created for this, but I think we have to get back to sort of the fundamentals of allocations and of the pacing in the schools test. And here we go with this schools test. I think this is going to lead to a problem with predictability. And I think if we're trying to get the school system and the county to be doing a better job of planning for those, I think this weakens the effectiveness of that and creates predictability problems. I also would say that while I very much am a supporter of affordable housing, I have concerns that, you talked about an exclusiveness in the community, but these are going to be developments that have 40% or more affordable housing. So from my perspective, what this does is further concentrate affordable housing instead of disperse affordable housing throughout the community and make our communities more inclusive and less exclusive.
Okay, colleagues, vote on Amendment 15.
Mr. Weinstein?
Ms. Siggety, I truly appreciate the energy and effort you put into putting this together, and we did have many conversations about this amendment. What Mr. Fox said, I believe some additional conversation, maybe some other approaches can get us to a place where we can push affordability, particularly at this level, forward in the environment that we were creating with this bill if it passes. So I'm looking forward to that conversation. But with that, for this particular amendment, at this particular time, I vote no.
Dr. Ball?
Yeah, I'd like to thank Ms. Siggety for bringing this up. I think it's an important conversation to have, but at this point in time, I don't think I can support this amendment, so my vote is no.
Mr. Fox?
Same as the previous two, no.
Ms. Siggety?
yes.
Ms. Tarassa?
No. Okay, move Amendment 16.
Second.
Okay, so Amendment 16, sort of in relation to that, Amendment 16 proposes to remove the housing unit allocation exemption for MIHUs, which is what I believe is in the bill, and this is removing that exemption. And for the same reasons I was saying before, I think we have to get back to what the fundamentals of allocations are, and the schools test on the other one, that we want to have pacing and predictability. So I think you all received an email from me where I said that maybe we should go back to the pot of allocations for MIHUs, but I think that's probably too extensive to amend, certainly at this point, but I certainly think we ought to consider creating that as a pot. But I think exempting all MIHUs from allocations is going to lead to a lot of predictability problems, and those are still kids. I mean, I think that's the fundamental issue here, is that you still have kids coming out of there and that we need to plan for. So that's why I introduced this.
Thank you, Mr. Ross. Any questions, colleagues? Okay, vote amendment 16.
Mr. Weinstein?
Given all the other constraints we've put on development, I don't feel I can vote for this particular amendment, so I vote no.
Dr. Ball?
No.
Mr. Fox?
Yes.
Ms. Siggety?
No.
I'll turn my mic off.
Yes.
Okay. Move to approve amendment 19 to Council Bill 61. Again,
Second.
19. Second. Move to approve amendment 1 to amendment 19. This adds Mr. Fox's name to the amendment.
I don't know about that
I think you need a second.
one. Second.
Thank you, Dr. Ball. Move amendment 2 to amendment 19.
Don't we have to
Did you
vote
wanna
amendment
vote
1?
amendment one?
What's that?
Would
We
you
have
like
to vote amendment
on-
one.
Oh, I
first.
guess we can do that. Vote amendment 1 to amendment 19.
Mr. Weinstein?
Yes.
Dr. Ball?
Begrudgingly, yes.
Mr. Fox?
Yeah, I'm not sure about it either, but yes.
Ms. Siggety?
Sure.
Ms. Tarassa?
Yes.
Move amendment 2 to amendment 19.
Second.
This, I'll speak to it to the amendment in its entirety. This amendment's, I'll try not to go back too far in time. This is something that I actually started a conversation with the administration probably a year and a half or two ago about our roads tests, and for whatever reasons, we didn't get all the way there to potential legislation. With Apfo, it refocused the conversation at our work session. I believe everybody was here when, with Mr. Edmondson and Mr. DeLuca, the suggestion was to move away from what I had originally drafted a few weeks ago as a unit-based test, to move to, they suggested, Department of Public Works and DPZ suggested going to a net peak hour trip measurement, which is consistent with how we're doing things in downtown Columbia and sort of what the industry is moving toward now. And so that's primarily it. The amendment adjusts the numbers. When we got the numbers, they were just basically copied and pasted with only one minor change for downtown Columbia. So in evaluating some additional information that we received from DPW, that's what the amendment does, just adjust them down a little bit to be more reflective potentially of the likely numbers of trips. Another element of the amendment is to provide DPZ with a certain amount of discretion to be able to look at an area around the development to determine whether or not, based on the area around the development that's included in the legislation, that they could potentially pick an intersection outside of that if, in fact, for a number of reasons, as elaborated in the amendment, they deemed that it was a more appropriate intersection to evaluate or for their traffic study. Believe that covers. Ms. Trosser, do you think I covered all?
Yeah, I think
points?
that covers it, and I really appreciate your work on this. I think that changing this over to net peak hour trips made a lot of sense, and so appreciate it. And I like that DPZ has that flexibility in this amendment.
So quick question, just on the numbers, more having to do with Amendment 2. When you take it down to 50, really, how, like, if you're talking residential development, how many units is going to trigger that?
So
And-
that was exactly my question, and I don't know if I have that memo with me, but we talked with Jennifer Biddle, and it's a complicated answer. I mean, it has to do with what type it is, but generally that would be 50.
Huh?
I mean, 50 would be about 50. I mean, I don't know if
50
that's
to
really
75
exactly
or
fair,
100.
but that was what we used. in
Yeah,
the plan.
and because again, it depends on the
The type of unit.
So we got the manual, and it has many, she was nice enough only to extract a sample of the different types of building types that how they would generate, what the ratio of generation for net trips were. Residential generally, and you'll have to forgive me if I can't remember the numbers off the top of the single family, attached about 1 net trip on average.
Single-family
Detached, sorry. Yeah. So,
Which was lower.
right, so I believe on average, what we'd find is most would be at sort of a minimum of 2 intersections. So, all right.
So interestingly enough, this impacts commercial development more significantly than it does residential development.
It very well may.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Okay.
And so,
Oh, sorry.
all right,
go ahead.
and so when you looked at creating this, did you take into account commercial development? Or did you specifically look
No,
at?
it was, again, all the information that was provided was, again, different types, so these are the numbers. The first set of numbers, what we were provided, generally, and that was, again, based on downtown Columbia, there was some conversation about how when you move outside of that dense area, the numbers would sort of spread out a bit more. And so, but among the types of things we looked at were commercial, again, they're all different types of.
Yeah, no,
So that was-
yes,
that was-
and I'm seeing the amendment, right?
Yep.
And I'm not,
I got you. Okay, so we'll vote Amendment 2 to Amendment 19.
Mr. Weinstein?
Yes.
Dr. Ball?
Yes.
Mr. Fox?
Yes.
Ms. Siggety?
yes.
Ms. Tarassa?
Yes.
Vote Amendment 19 as amended.
Mr. Weinstein?
Yes.
Dr. Ball?
Yes.
Mr. Fox?
Yes.
Ms. Siggety?
Yes.
Ms. Tarassa?
Yes.
We can share.
I turned mine off, too. It was off.
Okay. Now you can hear me, yes. Okay.
Try this one. See what my batting average is tonight. Move Amendment 18. 18 is for Long Reach.
Just, there's a little question, we're not moving 17 because 19
That-
passed.
That
That's
is
correct.
correct.
Just want to confirm for my colleagues up here, yep.
So move approval of 18, as I said.
Second.
Colleagues, again, a very important decision that we made, which was to approve a renewal, or an urban renewal project for the Long Reach Village Center, based on anything I could see happening, and now based on Amendment 20, this center will be closed, and we don't know for how long. So we have made a decision, and clearly determined that it was important to the Long Reach community and the Long Reach Village Center to renovate it, and this is an exemption for them so that, in fact, that previous decision that we made can move forward.
So this sort of goes to what I was saying about my concern on the other one, where I felt maybe we needed to have some sort of vote. In this case, we've already had that vote, or in the future, if there was something similar, we'll have had a vote. So I think I'm a little bit more comfortable as it relates to this, because there was an affirmative decision. And again, getting to predictability, I think that ends up being important.
We had an affirmative vote on downtown Columbia affordable housing, too, by the way.
But I understand that, and but yours, it wasn't just about, that wasn't just about downtown, so.
But we had an affirmative vote on that.
Right, but that's why I had said before, I mean, it was a broader amendment. It was not just about downtown, and as it related to downtown, I did support that amendment. But if that had been about specific things that we had voted on versus a very broad amendment, I may have supported it. But with that, if you want support on this one.
All right, very, very good. Okay, colleagues, anything else on
I
this?
mean, I just think the same predictability issues when you exempt a project. I mean, we've had that conversation, but I think it's the same.
I hear you, but at the same time, this is something that was put out there however many years ago at this point, as something that was determined that was needed. I mean, so many of the stuff, and that's the other thing too, you start getting into predictability and the planning on the school board part, you might want to go back and, look at some of the projections and see where we are now versus where we're projected in 2010. And there's a couple of things where certain projects had higher yield rates, such as Oxford Square and some other things that came in higher. But many of those things were pretty well known, and there was just lack of action.
Okay. Let's, if we're ready, we'll move to a vote on Amendment 18.
Mr. Weinstein.
So I agree with my colleagues, Mr. Fox and Ms. Siggety, in terms of whether they brought it up. The other thing about this that comes to mind is the decade or longer languishing of that particular area in the county, and what the potential possibility of it continuing to languish. And so with that vote, we'll vote yes.
Dr. Ball.
So when we first saw that the challenges were going on in Long Reach, and when we first started looking at the urban renewal, it was not to expand housing. And that has evolved over the last few years. And I think that we are at a point in time where exempting certain projects just for housing, especially in our most crowded, overcapacity school areas like Howard and Long Reach, is just not the right thing to do at this point. So with that, and frankly, there are so many aspects of that project, they could do some of the other portions of the development, the vertical garden, the greenscape, the open area for the next couple years. It doesn't have to be the housing part that comes first. So with that, my vote is no.
Mr. Fox.
I didn't want to ever do that project as an urban development thing in the first place, and didn't want to waste the money that was wasted, based off of some of the decisions that were made, the millions of dollars. But that decision was made despite, what I thought made sense, and the fact the county should have never gotten into the business of that. And it's unfortunate that there were probably some conflicts of interest that led to that project even occurring. And to say that a project that became blighted under the watch of this council, basically, or an area, and say that we're going to further ignore it, to me, I just can't even imagine that makes sense now that we put ourselves in the position of taking on that responsibility. And with that, I vote yes to the amendment.
Ms. Siggety.
Yes.
Ms. Tarassa.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Ball about this one. I can't believe that we would exempt something out that's in Long Range District, frankly. And the other thing is, this is an urban renewal project, but there could be others. And so I think we're going down a dangerous road here if we're going to start exempting projects. This project absolutely can go forward with the other aspects before they get to residential. I don't think that should have been a critical piece of it, but if it is, that we certainly can see the other pieces of it moving forward. And with that, my vote is no.
Move to approve Amendment 23.
Second.
23. So before we discuss the amendment, just real briefly, colleagues, and we talked about this at the work session. I don't think it was available at the time, but I said that this was coming, that we were going to be highlighting the fact, based on the report we received back from DPW, just basically dotting all our i's, crossing our t's about the water, sewer, stormwater, and solid waste, and how we address those in code related to adequacy and APFO. So that's what the primary the amendment is that I put forward. Do you want to?
Okay, move Amendment 1 to Amendment 23.
Second.
So I'm thrilled to say that this one proposes that DPZ ensure that there is adequate police, fire, and health services prior to a plan approval. And so we've had this long conversation. We've heard from many people over many years about these quality of life issues. And a number of us have been working pretty hard on trying to figure out how that could be done in a legally sufficient way, and continuing to get the answer that it couldn't be done in a legally sufficient way. And to my surprise, we were able to find something that could be done today. And so I'm very pleased with this amendment, and I hope you'll support it.
So how exactly is that, what are the measurements here? What's the determination?
And what's the determination?
On the amendment or the amendment to the amendment?
The amendment to the amendment, Amendment 1 to 23.
They're going to look and see if they're going to see if they're adequate.
Based off of what, they're just going to send an, I'm just, asking, I think it's going to send an email and say all is good, or, I mean, what's the?
Well, I will say this, I would have loved to have had the opportunity to do even more with this. Unfortunately, we were told over and over again that we couldn't do anything with this. So I think this is a good start. Hopefully, we can build in some stronger tests with relation to this, but this will at least require DPZ to look at the adequacy of those.
And the good thing about these
There
three
was somebody here before.
these three areas is we have a chief of police, a chief of the fire department, and we have a hospital who actually came in and talked to us about some of the needs there. So I think it'll be very easy to have a conversation. But like Ms. Terraza said, even at our work session, we continuously heard that we were unable to do it until just recently.
So Mr. Cook, as it relates to the hospital, and while I know Mr. Cohen is still here, of course, something near and dear to his heart, I thought one of the things that we heard there was that as it related to that, since that's not something we control, that wouldn't be something that we could check in on if that's what you're relating to. I didn't know if you were talking to the health department. I didn't know. I mean, it's not very clear here. You're saying the head of the hospital, but I mean, this isn't defined at all. I mean, and one of the things that we also looked at, and I hadn't seen this amendment to the amendment. I was comfortable with Mr. Weinstein's, and one of the things that we did see, and I was thinking all the different departments who went through the comparisons that we received, and basically what it showed was that we were meeting or exceeding every single other jurisdiction's thing. As a matter of fact, if we went back, we'd be going backwards to put in some of the levels that were in other people's AFOs would be going backwards for Howard County. You'd be able to remove police or increase population without changing police, for example, for many, many, many years. But going to the by going to the hospital, I thought that was something that we were told is not under our purview, and not that I can tell what it means by this amendment anyway.
So what I don't know,
Can I,
Right.
Mr. Cook, on that,
I apologize.
because that was what we were told at the work session. I can't remember if it was you or who was there that day.
Right, no, that's correct. As the topic was being discussed at that work session, the idea was holding up development until somehow a private hospital produced more beds that are regulated by the state, and that's what we said was really beyond the purview of the county to do. The general plan prescribes a number of policy guidelines that are to be considered generally by DPZ and the planning board as appropriate during various development processes. And I think what this amendment really is doing is, like I think Dr. Ball mentioned, checking with the police department in light of the proposed subdivision plan, checking with the fire chief, looking at what the general plan provides with regard to health, and seeing whether the proposed subdivision is going to push the capacities that we do have control over beyond what's available.
So he says specifically the head of the hospital, so, and then you're not saying that, so.
That was
I
an
guess-
example. It doesn't have to be the head of the hospital.
Well, but that's what you're expecting, and that's not what he's
That's
saying
not
we should do.
necessarily what I'm expecting. You
Okay.
said, how could they check? I said, there are ways, and I gave a few examples.
Okay, but the one example was you lined it up having to do with the three folks, Dr. Ball. I'm just asking because it's just not very specific, and it's not one that, I'm not sure exactly, if somebody got challenged, I mean, what is it based off of? I'm just trying to understand.
Well, as Mr. Cook just said, it's based off the general plan. If in the general plan, DPZ is already having to look at those areas, the same way that they would look at it through the general plan, they would look at it through here. I mean, I don't know why so many other jurisdictions are able to put it in their Adequate Public Facilities Ordinance, and it's something that we can't even consider.
Well, I mean, you say other jurisdictions, I mean, I could go pull out the stuff there on the police, and you get to the ratios, we blow away, the ratios, not that they mean anything, but that's because that's what, our police chief's saying, we're doing things above and beyond that, but you go to the ratios, I did the calculations on it, we could remove, I think, substantial numbers of police officers and still meet the requirement that was laid out. So I'm trying to understand, where we're short and where we're faltering. And I think the one area of concern I think a lot of people do have is the hospital, but that's also not something we have that type of direct control over.
Okay.
So-
I mean, we've had that conversation. I want to avoid going back to a conversation we've had multiple times before. Ms. Higgett, do you have anything
I
additional
actually,
to?
I might,
Okay,
all right?
if it's new and unique, that's
So
great.
it's my understanding that as part of the subdivision process, there's a subdivision review committee, and that in fact, at least fire is part of it, but I've seen, I believe, also a signature by police. And on some things, I've seen a signature by the health department. And so if that's already happening as part of the subdivision review process,
Yeah, I don't think they're looking at the adequacy, though. I mean, fire's looking to see if there's a concern in terms of the layout, et cetera. I don't think that is what they're looking at is adequacy there.
And Ms. Siggett, if you think that that's already happening, then this wouldn't adversely impact it because it's already going through that process.
well, it's going through the process, but I'm looking at the language here, and I'm having a hard time with health. I don't know what health is. All right, so as I don't know what health is. Is it the health department? If it was the health department, you should have said the health department, if that's what you meant. Because if, in fact, you want adequacy to be looked at, somebody who knows it has to look at it.
Right, who are you directing to look at it?
Okay, all right, colleagues, so we started with Amendment 1 to, with a lot of conversation. If I don't know that we're going further, we're having the same conversation, we're starting to repeat
Yeah,
ourselves. So
starting to repeat
if, And it is after midnight, I did notice that, we're not done. So with that, let's go to a vote on Amendment 1 to Amendment 23.
Mr. Weinstein?
So there's a small comparison to the First Amendment we consider in terms of it's not quite all the way there. I think there's something to be said for this. Also, in looking at some of these things, as I was looking at all the different elements of APFO, that there are some jurisdictions that are moving away from fire and police because the measurements don't actually achieve what they're looking for. So I think with that and the lack of clarity in this particular language, I vote no.
Dr. Ball?
Yes.
Mr. Fox?
Same thing the chair said, no.
Ms. Siggety?
I believe that based on the conversations we had with our police chief and with our fire chief, and certainly our known issues around the hospital, and so I don't understand what else health is, I have to vote no on this.
Ms. Tarassa?
Yeah, I think this is really unfortunate. I mean, we've been talking about this for years and years and years and years, and it wasn't until several hours ago that I received this exact language. I mean, this was the language that I got from the Office of Law. And so would I have liked to have built in a stronger test in here? Absolutely. And but this was the first that I could get out of through legal sufficiency. And I thought it was really important that we look at quality of life issues. And I think it's a shame that this amendment is not going to pass. But with that, my vote is yes.
Vote Council Bill 61 as amended.
Would you like to vote?
Oh, yes, well, I would like to finish with 23, yes. So vote Amendment 23.
Mr. Weinstein?
Yes.
Dr. Ball?
Yes.
Mr. Fox?
Yes.
Ms. Siggety?
Yes.
Ms. Tarassa?
Yes.
Okay, vote Council Bill 61 as amended.
Mr. Weinstein?
And we've talked a lot about all the various issues around it, so I'm not going to say much. I do want to, though, first thank the staff for the long hours that you all put in supporting not only this, but the many additional hearings we've had on this, and as well as the mulch and compost bill that we had earlier. And I also want to thank the community and the number of folks who have gathered to meet with me individually as groups in constructive conversations about these important issues. I would say, though, that that during the APFO debate and the CB60 as well, that all too often the public discourse devolved into personal and mean-spirited attacks, and that was very disappointing to me, and I know to my colleagues, or some of them that also experienced that, and I'm hopeful that honestly that we can get back to and embrace the choose civility mantra that was once the hallmark of our community. So just wanted to share that there's a lot of constructive conversation. As much as we may have disagreed up here, back in our chambers, those constructive conversations happen all the time. So needless to say, it's been a complex issue and a lot of moving parts, and it's just the best piece of legislation we can muster. I think given the information we have and the compromises that are required, I think we've done as good a job as we can with that. And with that, I vote yes.
Dr. Ball?
Yes.
Mr. Fox?
You know, Mr. Weinstein had mentioned also, some of the things with discourse, and probably that also applied to, the earlier bill tonight. But what is disappointing is when you see some of the political things that are occurring, and I hold actually an email from Dr. Ball, pointing at the executive as he responded to citizens and, not working with us. This is something that we've all been aware of. We all had a member on the APFO committee, including Dr. Ball, and I believe, his did support the amendments that came forward and were part of it. And, to see some of the disingenuous statements that have gone out to the community regarding this and have stoked some of the things that have now forced us into a bill that is really irresponsible in shutting down development totally, the way it's being set up. When there were some opportunities to do things the right way, when there wasn't this time frame that was sitting on us. A lot of times we do have some timeframes that we have to get something done by a certain date. This wasn't one of them. And I couldn't be, any more disappointed, really, with, some of the results of this bill. There's ways that, we definitely needed to address things. Heck, I've been saying for 11 years, as I've voted against so many of the ZRAs that increased density and took away commercial property and impacted our financial situation, while my other colleagues voted for those things year after year. Or the biggest development that was put out there, which was the Oxford Square property, which is the one that's really causing a lot of the impacts in the Northeast. I didn't support that. I wasn't the one who voted on that both times. It increased its density and has resulted in most of those homes. And now we have to worry about fixing those problems. And, I just, some of the messaging out there is frustrating and disingenuous. And, the more I see, and I couldn't believe it when I saw that email, it beyond had me upset. I think, and Dr. Ball, to be more than talk to you more after this, you talk about the county executive not talking to us. I don't remember the last time you talked to me before putting something, we're fellow council members. So, it works both ways. And I'm not saying I'm reaching out to you, but you can't be out there talking about reaching out, and you have that same opportunity. And it's very disappointing. And with that, I vote no.
Ms. Siggety.
So I'm going to start by saying that I have had hopes that we would come to a good place on Apfo. Certainly the community wanted us to and offered us many suggestions on how to get here. Unfortunately, I don't think that we got to a good place. I do not agree that this is a compromise, because it compromises too much the economic health of the county. So in fact, by basically creating an APFO that is a moratorium on residential building, I think we are doing the county an enormous disservice, and our citizens will in fact find out that that is the case. I know that they're going to feel good walking out of here tonight, but I think in the long run and in the short run, it's going to turn out to be a disappointment. The other thing that I do not think that we are doing, that we have an obligation to do, is that because we were given permission to build an adequate public facilities ordinance and to do affordable housing. So the only thing coming out of tonight is an agreement that MIHUs will not have to meet an allocations test. But it doesn't matter if, in fact, you have a moratorium on building. We won't see those MIHUs either. So I think we are not living up to the requirements of our permissions, and we are not living up to creating a community that is welcoming for all. We are creating a community that is sustaining for those who are here, and that is going to, again, I say, put our county in economic jeopardy. So I will have to vote no.
Ms. Tarassa.
So sometimes you can't get anywhere without compromising, and I think that's what we did here. And I think we worked well together. I think we had many discussions that got us to where we were. I would have liked to have seen lower utilization capacity. I'd like to have seen the removal of the cap, but what I'm thrilled about is we got a high school test, a roads test, a better roads test, and we were able to reduce numbers for elementary school and middle school. So I think we got a lot of really good things done here, and I have faith that the elected officials, both on the school board level and our level, will work together. Whoever might be in those seats at that time will work together for the future of the county, for the people that live in the county, and for our kids. I think it's really unfortunate, Mr. Fox, that you chose this opportunity to say choose civility and then not practice that. What I found is that while there were these are the types of things that impact people on a very local level, and emotions run high. But what I found in working with the community members is that the vast majority of them worked in a very respectful and reasonable manner, were willing to talk through things, they were willing to see places for compromise, and I had a much different experience than you. In addition, the biggest development that was approved was not Oxford Square, it was downtown Columbia, and you voted for it.
As did you.
I did, 2010, but I did not vote to increase 1,000 units last year, actually. With that, I think that what we got here was a good compromise, and I'm very pleased with the result, and with that, my vote is yes.
Move to remove Council Bill 62 from the table.
Second.
Mr. Weinstein?
Yes.
Dr. Ball?
Yes.
Mr. Fox?
Yes.
Ms. Siggety?
Yes.
Ms. Tarassa?
Yes.
This is for the allocations, this is eliminating the shared pool.
Okay.
Council
Mr.
Bill
Mark?
62, 2017, amending Plan Howard 2030.
Okay. Okay, so move to approve Council Bill 62.
Second.
Move to approve Amendment 1 to Council Bill 62.
Second.
Explanation. Oh, so the Amendment 1 to Council Bill 62 simply includes a cross-reference to Council Bill 61. And to refresh your memory, Council Bill 62 is the second half of a task force recommendation. In Council Bill 61, there was the removal of the shared allocations pool. Council Bill 62 reflects a readjustment of allocations for growth and revitalization in established communities, which was passed by the task force in accordance with the removal of the shared pool.
Okay. Yeah, so we know, remember that. We started this yesterday. So, move to approve Amendment 1, or, yes, vote Amendment 1 to,
Mr. Weinstein?
yes.
Dr. Ball?
Yes.
Mr. Fox?
Yes.
Ms. Siggety?
Yes.
Ms. Tarassa?
Yes.
Vote Council Bill 62 as amended.
Mr. Weinstein?
Yes.
Dr. Ball?
Yes.
Mr. Fox?
Yes.
Ms. Siggety?
Yes.
Ms. Tarassa?
Yes.
Okay, move to remove Council Resolution 124, 2017 from the table.
Second.
Mr. Weinstein?
Yes.
Dr. Ball?
Yes.
Mr. Fox?
Yes.
Ms. Siggety?
Yes.
Ms. Tarassa?
No. She can't hear because it's one. No.